in the AI era, it could become less about vocal perfection and the ability to sing perfectly, which is great news for me because I'm a terrible singer.
For me as well.
Maybe we will be stars now in
Yeah.
the next AI music era. But away from vocal perfection, more about like duration and taste and the ability to make people feel something and the persona behind it, because it's that human story and the perspective that AI cannot reproduce or cannot remove or earn credibly. So I think it becomes much more about the story told and the individual behind the creation.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, wherever you are. Thank you very much for joining for another episode of the Boardroom Club. My name is Yossi Garmazi, and I'm joined also by a good friend of mine, Amado Vargas. Amado.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
So today we are fortunate enough to interview none other than Victoria Weller, Head of Operations at ElevenLabs, a company that transforms how people create, interact with, and experience voice through AI. Now, this is one of the fastest growing company of all time, only raised in February, over $500 million in Series D. It's $11 billion valuation, triple the valuation of 1 year ago. And they closed 2025 with $330 million of ARR. So incredible traction indeed. And without further ado, Victoria, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is all ours, Victoria. So I want to start with a very interesting question about your background, because you're now in the operational side of ElevenLabs, maybe the fastest growing tech company now. But interestingly enough, you actually were or still are an astrophysicist and even did some space medicine. So I'm curious, how does scientific background help you to operate in a company like ElevenLabs?
Yeah, if I have to be honest, I didn't envision when I started studying astrophysics that I was doing it with the purposes of running operations at a hyper scale AI company. But I do think that there are many pieces of what I learned in a science degree that can be applied to this journey that we're on. And it starts with one of the core values that we have at ElevenLabs, which is first principles thinking, that I believe many companies claim to be implementing in their cultures as well. And first principles thinking has a lot in common with how you approach physics problems, where you dissect what the problem is at hand. You have certain constraints to operate within, and then want to find the best solution that is most efficient from getting where you are to where you want to go. And so the way of just repeated problem solving is essentially what defines the day-to-day of any company, and especially in the operations realm, it is that which I can come back to from what I learned in my studies. So it's kind of like a way of thinking, this first principles thinking, but there are more bits that I think the science degree helps. Like there's scientific rigor around forming hypotheses and then testing for those, and that helps in troubleshooting if something's not working the way that it's intended, kind of doing systems thinking and saying, okay, we're seeing this symptom. It could be due to this. Let's form an experiment around how to test for that. That's another example of how it's helped. And then also being very rigorous in terms of measuring everything and being very numbers driven and data driven. And that's something that any physicist will have, definitely in research, of all you really have is observing numbers and making sense of those. And in operations and in a company, you'd also want to track KPIs and metrics and see what insights you can gather on how the company is doing, what customers are doing, what are gaps in the product based on the metrics. And so that kind of numeric rigor is another piece that I've been able to practice in my studies and still use today at operating a company.
I could definitely see the parallel between dissecting atoms to dissecting the bits of sounds. And something else that's interesting about your background before ElevenLabs, that actually you and I guess some of the other founding team members of ElevenLabs came from none other than Palantir. Now, Palantir is a big tech company, but not the typical big tech companies out there, right? And specifically, I've read that you took the no title policy to ElevenLabs. So I'm curious, how did your experience there help you with, let's say, take ElevenLabs to the next level in terms of like less being rigid and more being maybe open, or
less rigid is definitely something that resonates with how I experienced Palantir, and something that we took from that and applied at ElevenLabs, and along with many other things that I definitely really enjoyed about the way that Palantir operates and still feels very agile and startup-y, even at over 2,000 employees, which is the size it was when I was there. And so we did kind of borrow a lot of their approaches. One of the things that really resonated was the not using titles and getting rid of job titles. And we started out the company with job titles, but quickly found that they get in the way of really executing and going to where the company needs us to sprint towards and running towards the fire. And so made, at the time, a pretty controversial decision to get rid of titles. And getting rid of titles is the hierarchical component. So we said there's no head of, there's no VP, but that doesn't mean getting rid of the structure and kind of the responsibilities. So we still have roles, and it's clear what each individual is working on and what their responsibilities are. So it's not that chaos broke out, but it made the hierarchy a lot flatter. And that allows agility in terms of not needing to stay in your lane, but going to where you are needed the most, where the overlap between the business need and your spikes lie, and that being very flexible throughout the company journey or your journey, but also allowing for the best ideas to come from anywhere. I think a very hierarchical environment suffers from the fact that there's a lot of top-down decisions. And as you probably know, the more different teams you work with, the narrower the capacity and the context. And so the best decisions don't necessarily come from higher up, but can come from any part of the company. And we really wanted to allow for an environment where even the new joiner in their first week would be able to spot something, come up with an idea, raise that, and that could also be the idea that gets chosen and implemented regardless of tenure or title.
guess easier said than done because you lead the operation of the company. And as we mentioned, okay, there is no titles, but ElevenLabs growing fast, even super fast to say the least. When you joined the company, it was 10 people. Now it's over 500 people, and it's going to be around like over 900 people by end of the year. So how do you make sure that the culture of the company stay the same, and not necessarily even stay the same, but not become too much chaotic?
A little bit of chaos, I guess, is okay.
It's always
And
good.
something that
Yeah.
we thrive in. This is a question that I care really deeply about. So I'm really happy we get to speak about it a little bit. And I could go on about this for hours. I think culture sometimes is used or regarded a very fluffy term, but I believe in the end, it's how people show up to work, how we engage with each other, the environment that we operate in, and it defines the company much more than the product necessarily does or the go-to-market motion does. So it has a really critical impact in how the company as a whole can scale. There's probably different answers to maintaining culture depending on the journey that a company is on. For ElevenLabs, on a hyper-scaling journey where we double headcount every 6 months, it becomes impossible to scale the culture by onboarding every new person and teaching them what the ElevenLabs culture is, what it means to work here, how you should behave, quote unquote. So a lot of work of scaling culture falls onto the talent acquisition. And we have gone through an exercise where we took the values of the company, which in essence define how we want to operate and what the environment should be like, and translated that into human attributes and said, someone that thrives at ElevenLabs, that feels at home here and that succeeds here and that we want to have at the company has the following attributes. And in my perspective, they fall very cleanly into two categories that balance each other out well. And on the one side, we strive to hire very ambitious, driven, hungry, hardworking individuals that really want to make a difference and push the company forward, balanced with individuals that also are kind and humble and hands-on and low ego. And I think that makes for a unique environment in which we can operate really quickly and ship products quickly and have a very productive way of working with each other. And so taking those attributes to the talent team and saying, we need to rigorously filter every single candidate to make sure that they have these attributes coming in and that they are aware of these things being important to us. And so from day one, they show up with that drive and intensity, but leave their ego at the door and are very humble and run towards the fire. And so I think the short answer for us is that it really comes down to hiring the right people to scale culture.
Running toward the fire is a great way to phrase it, because I actually listened to one of the latest episodes of 20 VC, and the head of revenue of ElevenLabs participated there. And he mentioned something that really resonated with me, that there was like 2 people in ElevenLabs that reached their quota in 2 months since the beginning of the year. It was like mind blowing.
Yeah, the sky's the limit. I think it helps, of course, being built on top of incredible research where we have the world's best audio models powering our infrastructure and our product. And then taking that to the customer and really showing the impact that it can have means that adoption cycle can run really quickly and you can steamroll through the quota. And that's just a great success story of how we all work together and how it takes great engineers and great go-to-market built on top of great operations to achieve these things for our customers.
That's incredible. And I wanted to take you a little bit to the beginning, because is there any problem that you maybe solved at the beginning of the way that was at the end super critical to the growth story of ElevenLabs, something that me and Amado might not anticipate, or something of that sort?
Something that I wasn't expecting to solve when I first joined was figuring out our compliance. And looking at the compliance where we are now, we have an entire team dedicated towards it. We have every single compliance certification that at least I could think of already achieved. And we were at a very different spot when I first joined. And Matty, on my first day, said we have B2B customers that are happy to sign, but they need SOC 2 compliance in order for us to do business together. So please look at that. And I searched for the first couple of weeks and looked at what does it take to be SOC 2 compliant, implemented that across the way that we operate and the different teams, including engineering. And that allowed us to get the SOC 2 certification pretty quickly and had an impact of the first enterprise customers being signed, kicking off a flywheel to the point where we are now, where 50% of our revenue is from enterprise customers. And so this is one of the hidden infrastructure pieces or hidden compliance pieces that was a big unlock at the beginning of our journey that I got to work on, that has been completely taken into another level by the security team at this point.
It's remarkable. We actually just hosted the CPO of Venta. So we spoke a lot about the GRC, SOC 2, and indeed a very complicated compliance space, to say the least. And okay, I guess it's also a great segue for my next question. So let's say we are in a day one deployment of a big bank, maybe even other big enterprise. Do you ensure that the compliance and safety doesn't become the bottleneck for speed?
Core pieces are really having those certifications and having thought through what does it take to be HIPAA compliant, what do we offer in our product, what needs to be implemented there for it not to become a bottleneck. And so we offer things like zero retention options where the conversations aren't recorded, and that unblocks our HIPAA aligned configurations and BAA support, so that we really offer the admin governance controls for even banks and financial institutions to become our customers. That also means that the day one of a deployment or the day one of working with these large enterprises centers a lot about understanding their business. What is it that they're currently doing and working on? Where is time being spent in terms of internal calls in trainings or outbound, but external calls in terms of customer support, and then taking steps towards saying, how can we create an implementation around that? And do we start with deflection impact or financial impact, level 0 support or level 1 support? Do we handle the intent routing or verification, IVR, and build around that, and then slowly start delivering that in an initial use case and start very narrow and roll that out on day one and prove out quickly the impact that has on the customer and on their way of operating, and then starting to build an agent network around that and tackling more and more of the volume until they are fully covered by our 11 agents suite.
ElevenLabs, I guess, started as more to the creator side, sort of like B2C, right? And you mentioned that the B2B side and the enterprise becoming a big chunk of the revenue of ElevenLabs. But from the operational side, did you see any major challenge when you started to serve all of these big bank or Deutsche Telekom or Revolut or something of that sort, from your perspective of the operational side?
That's absolutely right. We kind of came up from the B2C realm that is just inherently much faster. So when launching, that was the immediately shown product market fit, and creators started using that side of our suite, now called 11 Creative. It's something that we still care deeply about and find really valuable and part of our identity to allow creators to generate content with ElevenLabs, and then have that balanced with the B2B side that was a bit slower to take off. And as you insinuate, it kind of creates these dual dynamics where the product surface is fundamentally different. Creators care about the voice quality, enterprises care about uptime and latency. And so it's a dynamic in which we have a whole suite of requirements that we're catering towards at the same time. And we solve this by having dedicated teams that are shipping for the individual kind of use cases or products individually. So we have 11 Creative as a product team, we have the 11 API infrastructure level, and the 11 agents that is more catered towards B2B use cases. And all of those are built on top of our research. So we have the proprietary models that are best in class AI audio to really support all of those use cases. And the work with the largest enterprises has really accelerated over time and allowed us to reach this near 50-50 split between self-serve and revenue by the end of last year.
That's really amazing, because usually you see companies either doing B2B or B2C, concentrate on one of the other. So to do them both at the same time, and a big chunk of the revenue actually. So it's incredible. Now I got one last question, and this is the most philosophical of them all, because after all, ElevenLabs music, right? So you could take it however you want. People could just generate music being AI generated without maybe people even know that it's AI generated. So do you think the concept of being a star will fundamentally change?
Definitely a philosophical one. To tackle the technical pieces first, 11 Music is the first music model built entirely on licensed data. So that was a huge unlock and something that we were really proud to offer our customers in terms of the next kind of realm of AI audio. And it has influenced how music can be created. To think about that philosophical angle, my take would be that in the past, there was probably more equal measure of talent and personality, where in the AI era, it could become less about vocal perfection and the ability to sing perfectly, which is great news for me because I'm a terrible singer.
For me as well.
Maybe we will be stars now in
Yeah.
the next AI music era. But away from vocal perfection, more about like curation and taste and the ability to make people feel something and the persona behind it, because it's that human story and the perspective that AI cannot reproduce or cannot remove or earn credibly. So I think it becomes much more about the story told and the individual behind the creation.
It's a whole different world altogether. I think there was a one time that it was on Spotify that a band, AI generated band, got to the top of the list and people didn't even know. Maybe with 11 Loves they got a shot. So I don't know.
It's interesting, the different realms of like, you can create it traditionally, you can create it entirely on AI, but there's also the interim where you can kind of boost the creation with AI and get inspiration from it or supplement your creation with it and still have an interplay of the star, as you call it, and just leverage AI in the creation.
Interesting time to say the least. And I'll look up for your song on Spotify next time I open it. So let's see. So, Victoria, thank you so much for answering all of my questions. And Amado, without further ado, the floor is yours. Take us on.
Thank you, Yossi. And Victoria, you went into the innovation of potentially music recognition or enhancement. I think the most impressive thing with ElevenLabs for me is over 70 languages that your team works with. So going more into innovations and what ElevenLabs is working with, looking at the ElevenLabs London Summit, the voice restoration commitment. In March 2026, this year, ElevenLabs pledged 1 billion in free voice restoration technology for people who have lost their voices. What motivated that commitment and how does it reflect the broader mission of the company?
This is one of my favorite use cases or kind of initiatives at the company because it shows the impact on such a human level. It's actually something that isn't launched in 2026 per se, but something that grew organically over time. So since 2023, we've already had a program in place that over 7,000 people have been able to use to restore their voices lost either due to ALS or cancer or a stroke or similar. And it becomes such a personal and touching and emotional moment to be able to restore the voice and be able to talk with loved ones and family and friends again in the voice that one used to have. And the commitment really reflects one of our core beliefs, which is that voice is identity. It's a very human way of applying our technology. We've also done a project where we launched a docuseries called 11 Voices and took use cases or like examples of individuals that had lost their voices and used our technology to restore it and followed them and kind of got their story so that you can get a firsthand experience of what that means and what the impact is on individuals.
Absolutely well said. And I agree. I think voice is the most human form of communication. So now going more into the technical side of things, into audio resolution. One standout announcement was PVC Studio, enabling 44 kHz high fidelity output. Given your background in high precision scientific fields, how does increasing audio resolution from 24 to 44 kHz affect computational requirements and the operational cost of running large-scale server infrastructure?
Probably should have mentioned this as one of the core pieces how I keep up on my studies. Definitely familiar with kilohertz, etc. Didn't consider that would be a core part of my career going forward. But to answer your question, definitely increases the resolution and the quality standard of the audio created. And that has the implication on both the cost of generating, but also storage. And doubling it means that the amount of storage that you need is just twice as costly. And that's why the high fidelity output is gated to higher tiers and to where it makes sense in terms of economics, but also in terms of the customer value, where you want to create broadcast, audiobooks, music production in a way that it justifies the infrastructure premium.
Great answer. And now going more into the strategic component, you spoke with Yossi about B2C and finding product market fit. So let's go into balancing multiple customer segments. When planning the product roadmap, do you optimize the creators, developers, or enterprise customers? And how do you avoid unintentionally building three different companies at once?
This is, you're making it sound like we're doing everything. And to some extent, I think that's
Somewhat.
true. We are the very ambitious bunch I mentioned earlier. So really care about going after the opportunities that are at hand and really believe that the opportunities are in all of those three realms in API, 11 Creative, and 11 Agents. The way to unite them all is again the research layer and thinking about what are the core capabilities in terms of AI audio that are required to build excellent products on top of, and starting with that as our backbone. And that is what keeps it all together and creates the united narrative or capability around it. And that allows us to abstract the API layer as the infrastructure layer on top of the research and the top of the models, and then the product layer with 11 creative and 11 agents just as the UI, basically, to be able to access that incredible research on top of that. So to answer shortly, we prioritize all three of them, but don't feel like it means that it goes in different directions. It's very neatly tied up together under the umbrella of leading with the top AI research.
So always going back to that core foundation, and that makes perfect sense. So now going more into Victoria in your own path in the business world, advice for entrepreneurs. What advice would you give someone who needs to manage all the operational side, like you, of a fast-growing AI startup? I do remember you saying that ElevenLabs still has that startup foundation at its emotional core. So what would you recommend for entrepreneurs?
And I hope we get to keep that startup foundation at the core for a long time. The advice that I'm so happy I can wholeheartedly bring out to the world, and now that it makes even more sense, is to write everything down. And this is something that I've always practiced to kind of overcome my, when moving quickly, I tend to forget things pretty easily too. So I've practiced writing everything down so I don't lose track of the different threads and decisions and to-dos, etc. So I've always practiced writing things down. But now in the AI world, it makes more sense to write things down, because if it's not written down, your agentic layer cannot access it, and in a way it doesn't exist. So it becomes a core piece of advice for all AI native companies. And then, of course, for hyperscalers, it becomes so important to have an asset to look back to and share for decisions that are made, so that everyone that joins the company can say, like, why are the things that the way that they are, and can figure out the context themselves. If it's not written down, it just creates so much more work in terms of sharing context, and almost becomes invisible, especially with agentic layer on top.
That's an excellent answer. That's actually the first time I heard that, but it makes perfect sense. Voice communication is the best for fluidity. Writing down is the best for rigidity and maintaining that. And
Yeah.
with your experience with startups, that last point on that, to you, what does it mean to be an AI native startup today?
I think that's a really loaded question, because there's like a spectrum from being AI forward to AI assisted to AI native. And I do think most companies would like to place themselves on the AI native end of that spectrum. But there's an honest question to ask yourself of, what does AI native really mean? And in my opinion, that has a lot to do with just and human in the loop, and being very agentic in all of your operations. So I do think that's a world to strive towards, to continue deploying agents in all of your internal operations and external operations to get to the point of AI native. It's something that's much easier to achieve as an AI company. Everyone that works at ElevenLabs believes in AI. We work in the field of AI. We're selling AI. We're building AI. So there's no work needed to convince individuals that this is something really important. But it does take time to create that operational layer and to adjust from the way that we've always done things to keeping up with what is possible, as that is shifting every day as well, and making full use of the thing that we're building in-house as well.
Absolutely. I think that's a great answer to a loaded question. Now, through your own ascension, mentorship, who has influenced you the most as a mentor? Or it could be more than one person, of course.
I put a lot of emphasis on this because of the journey that we're on, where we're all doing something that we've never been done before. And it's not just by merit of joining early and scaling quickly, but also by merit of the time that we're in. It means the AI era that can do things in a way that they've never been done before. So looking for mentors, I believe, is a really important piece to kind of bounce ideas off of each other. For me, there hasn't been an individual that stands out the most, but a kind of bank of like-minded operators that I've built over the years. And I put a lot of emphasis in connecting with them and spending time with them. And one of the most influential things, or the most rewarding pieces for me, has been the learning that none of the problems that we face are unique, and that it's normal to just continuously run into a problem and then solve it and face the next problem and solve it, and that we're all just on a journey of continuous problem solving. And so having peers and mentors that are facing the same challenges or have faced the same challenges has been absolutely core to staying sane throughout that journey.
100%. Now, going to life outside the office, or I actually want to connect on that point. I think that was a really good segue. So, in terms of speaking with people that you haven't met, if you could have coffee with a historical figure, or it doesn't have to necessarily be a historical figure, just someone that you're interested in, who would that person be?
I would take that probably back to my physics background and say Marie Curie would be really interesting to me. I think she worked on some groundbreaking work as we are now, and she didn't get held back by the norms. And I'd be really curious to hear firsthand what motivated her and what the experience was like, and if there's some similarities of what we're working through now as well, so many years later.
Going back to those physics roots. And then my final question for you, Victoria, before pinging back to Yossi. In terms of unwinding from the high-speed world of AI, what are
Yeah.
some hobbies or passions that you have that help you disconnect or recharge?
For me, it's definitely working out. I exercise every day, and I absolutely prioritize that to be able to like keep a clear mind. And I go running. I did a high rocks recently, so it's a combination of like cardio and strength just to switch off and feel like I've moved my body and have cleared my mind. That and
Absolutely.
sleep,
Oh,
if you
sorry.
can call sleep a hobby.
Absolutely. Just make sure to be a well-rounded individual. Also a fellow runner, 5Ks, 10Ks. So, I'm a big
Yay.
fan of that.
Nice.
Victoria, thank you so much for the insights. Yossi, back to you.
So, Victoria, one last question. What is your favorite movie of all time? So,
My favorite movie recently has been an all-time classic, and I think it's because it's so connected to what we're working on. The movie Her, with the voice
I
of
saw it.
Scarlett Johansson. I
Joaquin Phoenix as well.
watched it so many years ago, and it was just science fiction at the time and seemed like a crazy future. And what ElevenLabs is building is bringing us closer to that vision or that world. And so I find it really cool to see like how in the past people were dreaming big, and now we are building those dreams in real life.
I agree. It's a great movie indeed. Scarlett Johansson and Joaquin Phoenix from the other side. It was sort of like dystopic in a way, but
Yeah. Yeah.
interesting time. And Victoria, thank you so much for joining us. It's really been a pleasure hosting you and fun conversation. For everybody else in the audience, so stay tuned. We have other interesting episodes. Katie Berg from Marvi, president of Cisco, also joined us, so stay tuned.